Hi everyone, this is Hana, and welcome back to my island. Last time I talked about creator Lee Sung Jin's Beef on Netflix. Finally, Beef Season 2 is out. As soon as it was released, I binge-watched the entire season in one sitting. Once again, Lee Sung Jin absolutely knocked it out of the park. I remember an interview he did when he visited Korea after the success of the first season. And he said the Korean perspective is now a universal global perspective. That really stuck with me. So today I want to share my thoughts on Beef Season 2 with you. Warning, there are spoilers ahead. So if you haven't watched yet, please be careful. And if you are curious about my review of the first season, the creator's background, or my analysis from a Korean point of view, please check out my previous video. All right, let's get started. Winning 8 Emmys is a lot of pressure to live up to. But that didn't slow down director Lee Sung Jin at all. Instead, he dove headfirst into an even darker, deeper philosophical rabbit hole. The Netflix original anthology series Beef, which received worldwide praise, has returned with a completely new cast and setting. The first season focused on a destructive connection between two 1.5 generation Asian immigrants, triggered by a road rage incident in Los Angeles. This time, the scale is completely different. The story jumps from the ultra-luxurious Monte Vista Point Country Club in Montecito, California, all the way to the heart of Seoul. With this massive change in scenery, the show delivers an ambitious masterpiece that really digs into sociology and philosophy. This season has an independent storyline, and a sharp message cuts in many different directions. It tackles the suffocating microclass conflicts between millennials and Gen Z, the loss of humanity hidden underneath lost capitalism, and the intense identity crisis of the diaspora. The show perfectly captures those fatal moments of absolute disconnection we inevitably hit in these messy, tangled relationships. In today's video, I will break down the incredible evolution of the story step by step. We will look at the reality of class struggles in late capitalism, the diaspora identity from a Korean perspective, and the power of dynamics of cultural representation. Of course, we'll also talk about the amazing ensemble acting and the artistic beauty that crosses over art, literature, and music. Finally, we will dig into the core Eastern philosophical conclusion of the show, which is karma and the endless cycle of life. In Season 1, Danny, played by Steven Yeun, and Amy, played by Ellie Wong, ironically share their darkest depression and inner abyss while trying to destroy each other. Through their destructive actions, they found a bizarre connection that broke right through the terrible isolation of modern society. But Season 2 takes a completely different turn. It brings the fundamental isolation and absolute disconnection rooted deep in modern relationships to the front. Showrunner Lee Sung Jin clearly stated, if Season 1 was about two isolated individuals finding someone to live with, Season 2 is about how to actually live with that person. He really put a magnifying glass on collapsing relationships. The toxic marriage between Josh, played by Oscar Isaac, the general manager of the Monte Vista Point Club, and his wife Lindsay, played by Carey Mulligan, an interior designer, is the perfect example. On the outside, they look like the perfect millennial couple. But behind closed doors, their relationship is completely rotting away. 39-year-old Lindsay is crushed by the fear of aging and paranoid anxiety about her wasted youth. She screams that her past choices have completely fossilized her life. On the other hand, Josh has blown all of Linji's inheritance on his sick mother's medical bills. Using this against him, Linji refuses to get a divorce, and they keep dragging out this toxic, destructive living situation. Because they know each other's deepest flaws and insecurities so well, they weaponizing them and hate each other even more. It's the most brutally honest form of disconnection. To protect their social status and financial safety, they act like a solid team in public. But the moment the doors close, violence and disgust take over. It reminds me of the terrible textures in David Chase's The Sopranos or Ingmar Bergman's Scenes from a Marriage. It lays bare exactly how modern love can plummet into an oppressive, violent contract. What's even more interesting is the timing. Beef Season 2 came out right around the same time as Netflix Something Very Bad Is Going to Happen, produced by the Duffer Brothers, and A24's new movie, The Drama. These projects also tap into our extreme anxiety and deep doubt about the traditional marriage system. Even though their genres are completely different, it's like they all promise to ask the same question. It is a fascinating trend that shows just how much existential doubt pop culture in 2026 has about the romantic idea of forever commitment. The relationship between the Gen Z couple working under Josh, Austin, played by Charles Melton, and Ashley, played by Cailee Spaeny, shines a light on another type of shallow disconnection. They dress up their trauma and affection in smooth, trendy psychological buzzwords, often called therapy talk. But in reality, they are totally blind to who the other person truly is. Later in the show, their pathetic illusion shatters inside the holding room at the Turcos clinic in Seoul. Austin coldly cuts her off, telling Ashley that he doesn't love her anymore. He goes a step further and cruelly diagnoses exactly why she clings to him so blindly. He says it's just the primal fear of being abandoned caused by the trauma of her parents' divorce. Ashley didn't truly love him either. She just used him as a safety blanket to cover up her anxiety. Instead of truly seeing each other, their love is parasitic disconnection where they just use each other to fill their own voids. Earlier, right after Austin breaks up with her at the hotel, Ashley brings up the fact that she has viable embryos left. She tries to force a connection using biology. This scene perfectly nails our creepy obsession with leaving a mark, even when a relationship is completely beyond repair. At the very top of this whole circus sits the Korean billionaire chairwoman Park, played by Yuh-jung, who swallowed up Monte Vista Point, and her husband, Dr. Kim, played by Song Kang-ho. In the show, Dr. Kim works down the hallway of the Turcos clinic and pours out a bitter long-take monologue about the true nature of a second marriage. He says if your first marriage is about chasing love, your second is a compromise to love life itself alongside someone else. But soon, Dr. Kim lets out a painful sigh, saying that money and power hide that true face hideously. This is the moment we realize that even the supposedly tight ones among the ultra-rich are just cruel, transactional disconnections meant to protect their money and status. In the end, when Dr. Kim tries to cut a deal with the police, Chairwoman Park, who holds all the real power, has him taken out without a second of hesitation. She ruthlessly tosses her fake marriage straight into the trash. It is the destructive final period of absolute disconnection. Fifth Season 2 dissects how human emotions, love, and even bioethics are downgraded into subcategories of the capitalist system and traded. Director Lee Sung Jin once declared, "You cannot tell an honest story in modern society without including the variable of class and capitalism." A Monte Vista country club, a secret haven for the upper class, looks peaceful on the outside. But in reality, it functions as a perfect miniature world that breeds fierce class confliction. The Gen Z couple, Austin and Ashley, accidentally witness a destructive fight between their bosses, Josh and Lindsay, and film it on their smartphones. This blackmail isn't just some impulsive mistake born out of voyeurism or cheap revenge. At its core, it highlights a chronic disease in American society, the broken healthcare system. Ashley is suffering from a fatal emergency condition called ovarian torsion. But thanks to crushing medical bills and zero health insurance, she can't even get near an operating room. The harsh reality of being pushed to the edge of survival forces these two young people to become desperate criminals. They shake Josh by his fatal weakness and demand a promotion along with a proper company health insurance plan. Instead of morals or true love, a shiny new health insurance card becomes the ultimate measure of human dignity. It clearly shows how a broken system forces the vulnerable to turn around and cruelly choke each other just to survive. It is a sharp text that proves how a broken capitalist system is away at personal morality and encourages horizontal violence between classes. The philosophical depth of the show hits its peak with the sharp insights pouring out of Chairwoman Park in the second half. Chairwoman Park coldly mutters, "Capitalism is the law of nature and love simply acts as a parasite inside a massive system." Under this chilling philosophy, even our deepest emotions are just a shallow biological reaction controlled by the logic of money. When her husband, Dr. Kim, kills a patient due to a medical malpractice during surgery, Chairwoman Park steps up to cover it up. She takes Josh's pretty embezzlement tricks from the club, blows them up to a massive scale, and builds a flawless money laundering network. The most powerful defense mechanism to erase the unjust death of another person and block out terrible guilt is none other than overwhelming capital. Cold, hard calculation has completely wiped out her humanity. Ultimately declaring, "The only thing I truly care about is myself," Chairwoman Park shows her true colors. She removes her husband, who became a thorn in her side, and even her adopted son Ushi, played by BM, who sneaked in as a tennis coach without leaving a trace. It strikes right at the ugly core of late capitalism. The idea that emotions or love are just illusions that can be thrown in the trash at any time in front of massive capital. The most tragic part of their relationship network is how the myth of empathy and solidarity across generations completely collapses. In the vertical structure from the boomer generation, Troy, to millennial, Josh and Lindsay, and down to Gen Z, Austin and Ashley, the romantic idea of the older generation guiding the youth is completely pronounced dead. The brief moment of connection where Josh and Austin and Lindsay and Ashley broke down generational walls and shared their vulnerability probably weren't total lies. Austin opened up to Josh and asked for advice about his feelings for Eunice. Lindsay initially approached Ashley to get video evidence for her divorce, but eventually opened her heart and offered genuine help. But this momentary empathy crumbles away helplessly when their survivor is threatened. The way Austin casually walks out of Josh's house proves their deep talk didn't mean a thing. Most importantly, on the flight to Seoul, right after Lindsay finds out her dog escaped and was killed by a coyote because of Ashley, she takes vicious revenge. It brutally exposes how quickly empathy disappears when self-preservation kicks in. When pushed into a critical corner, the characters betray other generations in the most cowardly way to survive. Anxious that they might be sold out to Cheoman Park, Josh and Lindsay agree to blame all the charges on the younger generation, Austin and Ashley, if the police start to pressuring them. It's a disgusting conspiracy to use their juniors as human shields just to cling to their pathetic privileges. When a corner Josh begs the boomer Troy for help, Troy coldly rejects him, proving he never even saw Josh as a real friend. This perfectly shows the peak cruelty of this ecosystem. In the end, just like a chairwoman Park's insight, the solidarity between them was nothing but a fake, hollow shell strictly for myself. Inside the capitalist pyramid, even generational connection turns into an excuse to trample others in times of crisis. The show throws a heavy and cruel truth that only a selfish, every man for himself mentality survives. As the stage expands from Montecito, California to the heart of Korea, Seoul, the story pulls the cultural clash between East and West, the deep identity of multicultural families, and uniquely Korean cultural codes straight to the front. This is where showrunner Lee Sung Jin's talent explodes. He violently kicks aside the shallow, Western-centric Orientalism that Hollywood has milked to death. And he fills that empty space with a Korean culture, finely crafted from a multi-layered and sharp insider's perspective. The elegant high society people of Montecito, who prided themselves on being the white establishment in a society that bows to capital. Watching them drop like flies into total submission before the astronomically wealthy Chairman Park delivers an incredible, cathartic power reversal.
Excellent. 안녕하세요.
White characters like Josh and Lindsay desperately try to cram complex Korean cultural manners into their heads just to survive at the club and protect their fragile status. The destruction of arrogant stereotypes starts the moment Chairwoman Park lightly crushes Western prejudices with her fluent English, as if mocking the unconscious assumption that an elderly Asian woman won't speak English. She completely dominates the room in perfect English. Takes the scene where Josh twisted his tongue trying to squeeze out clumsy Korean, bending over backward to give a deep 90-degree bow to Cheoman Park. Cheoman Park immediately sees right through these fake manners. She instantly puts him in his place by saying, Koreans bow our heads exactly as much as we respect the other person. When I lived abroad, I actually used to tell my Western friends the exact same thing. When Koreans greet someone, instead of hugging or kissing, we bow our heads. And we bow lower to show more respect. This scene where Cheoman Park tames and trains Josh turns the table on Westerners trying to use other cultures as tools. It makes it crystal clear who holds the real power. The ultimate power flip happens later in Seoul, seen in Josh's attitude toward the Korean bodyguard after he gets caught. Josh assumes the bodyguards definitely can't speak English. Like he's talking to a toddler, he uses hand gestures and spits out English one slow syllable at a time. These scenes absolutely destroy the white savior complex, the idea that Westerners always view Asian as inferior people who need to be educated and saved. Director Lee Sung Jin perfectly captures how deeply Asian immigrants relate to this exhausting, lifelong question. Hey, where are you really from? Or they insert disguised as a compliment. Oh, you speak English so well. He mocks the narrow-minded Western gaze that tries to trap Asians in the frame of permanent strangers, and exposes just how ridiculous and tone-deaf their clumsy superiority complex actually is. It's a deeply satisfying yet bitter visual shock that traditional Western media would never dare to show. But the truth behind all this bowing and scraping isn't some noble respect for another culture. It's just desperate, blinding submission to the overwhelming weight of money. The show perfectly illustrates how cold, hard cash, not race or nationality, rules at the very top of cultural hegemony. Josh acts like a royal lapdog for VIP member Troy. But when Troy casually calls him amigo, pulling rank with subtle racism, Josh coldly keeps his mouth shut. It perfectly exposes how this whole pyramid works. The show doesn't just use the highly contextual Korean tradition of three refusals, politely declining three times, as a cheap cultural gimmick. It smartly turns it into a terrifying landmine that drives intense conflict. When Korean characters like Cheoman Park's secretary Eunice offer favors, the Westerners, who are totally used to blunt, low context communication, completely misread her polite refusal as a hard no. On the flip side, they sometimes blindly accept things without reading the room, miss their cue, and fall into a massive mess. At a dinner in Seoul with Chairman Park and Dr. Kim, Ava, Troy's wife, she speaks up. Completely used to Western directness, she blurts out. One time at the club, Eunice said she wasn't hungry. Then I saw her eating. I will never forget. Weird girl. Eunice was just following the Korean virtue of the three refugees by politely declining. But because the Westerners took her words completely literally and didn't offer her food again, she had to go find something to eat on her own later. Honestly, I ran into this a few times myself when I lived abroad. But Ava totally misses that subtle cultural context and just write Eunice off as a weird girl who says one thing and does another. This subtle cultural mismatch twists the character's tense psychological warfare into something truly bizarre. The absolute peak of this miscommunication happens during the Trosk clinic scene in Seoul. It's a nerve-wracking moment where Dr. Kim makes a heavy confession about his terrible medical malpractice and dirty corruption. Trapped behind the language barrier, Josh, Lindsay, and Ashley latch on to just one word they recognize: dinner. They completely misinterpret the situation and think he's seriously trying to serve them Korean-style gazpacho. This tragic, hilarious mix-up perfectly mocks the idea of a connected global era. It shows how language and cultural barriers are still massive iron walls that keeps us from ever truly knowing what someone else is thinking. Meanwhile, Dr. Kim, who keeps speaking in Korean the whole time, actually scolds them for not understanding him properly. Historically, people who don't speak English have had to bend over backward learning the language, fixing their pronunciation, and trying so hard just to understand native speakers. And Asians often felt they were only succeeding if they finally got recognition and validation from the West. But this scene is a powerful symbol that the world is finally shifting. Austin is a mixed race character born to a white father and a Korean mother. He's a guy taking the full brunt of the identity confusion that multicultural kids face, along with the heavy pressure to just blend into mainstream white society. The most painful part of his story is the constant misunderstandings his appearance triggers. The fact that even the people at his childhood Korean church mistook him for Mexican shows how he was treated as a total outsider, isolated even within his own Korean roots. His fiancée actually completely whitewashed him, seeing him not as Asian, but just as an Arizonan. And the white club members have no problem throwing rude microaggressions at him, casually asking if he has ever dated an Asian girl. Austin bites back with sharp defensive hate, replying, "It would feel like dating my mom." Austin's mask of assimilation, which he wore to erase his Asian roots and kiss up to white mainstream society, starts to crack the second he meets the Korean secretary Eunice. Eunice sees his Korean identity exactly for what it is. She actually gives him a real sense of belonging by making him a manager at the club's wellness center. We can actually explain Austin's transformation using Carl Jung's concept of the shadow self. According to Jung, the shadow is the dark side of our unconscious that we intentionally reject and push down. For Austin, his shadow is the Asian heritage he desperately denied just to survive in white America. It's also the twisted craving for power and recognition hiding right beneath his suppressed anger. Eunice is the trigger that yanks this dark hidden identity right up to the surface. But Austin's awakening doesn't lead to the true freedom. Just like Ashley blindly used him as a crutch, he blindly clings to Eunice's unconditional acceptance, pouring out desperate I love yous. This isn't real love. It's just a new survival lifeline for an incredibly lonely soul. With a completely brand new cast, Season 2 lets us witness the absolute peak of detailed directing and world-class acting. Oscar Isaac and Carey Mulligan deliver a marriage-fight sequence in the very first episode that practically swallows the screen whole. This isn't just your standard shouting match. It feels like a highly precise, destructive choreography. The blocking, the breathing, the camera work, everything is so carefully calculated and rehearsed, like they were preparing for a Broadway play. Watching Josh go wild with a golf club while Lindsay ruthlessly smashes his things feels weirdly similar to the cartoonish violence of Looney Tunes. Just like classic cartoon characters ignoring the law of physics to beat each other up, these two destroy each other's lives with an explosive, almost unrealistic amount of energy. This bizarre contrast, turning a terrifying real-life disaster into cruel slapstick comedy, captures the grotesque reality of a middle-class couple collapsing under capitalist pressure. The actors take that deep existential loss felt by aging millennials, combine it with the fatal emotional blows you can only deal to someone whose rock bottom you know, and elevate the whole thing with unreal acting. Bringing in Yuh-jung and Kang-ho to absolute legends of Korean cinema gives the series a massive artistic anchor. Cheoman Park, played by Yuh-jung, is a cold-blooded sociopath billionaire. She's a queen bee who exploits everyone she touches, leading them straight to ruin. She completely shatters that sweet, warm Korean grandmother image she shows us in film like Minari. As an absolute dictator who controls global capital and literally holds her husband's life in her hands, she radiates terrifying charisma. Dr. Kim, played by Song Kang-ho, looks like a clumsy, ridiculous parasite feeding off his powerful wife. But inside, he's a deeply complex guy harboring heavy guilt and a doomed destiny. His long-take monologue in the Seoul Clinic hallway, pouring out his cynical views on marriage, paired with the hospital chase scene that feels like a massive nod to Park Chan-wook's Old Boy, are hands down the highlights of the season. Director Lee Sung Jin even called the one-take scene shot at the Amore Pacific headquarters the peak of my career. This sequence perfectly visualized the flash, glamorous shell of Korea's upper class against the hollow emptiness inside. The behind-the-scenes story that director Bong Joon-ho actually visited the set to offer support and joke around just proves how deeply connected this show is to the DNA of Korean cinema. Director Lee Sung Jin doesn't just use art, literature, and music as pretty background noise. He actually turns them into intertextual tools to build the philosophical backbone of each episode and reflect the character's subconscious. While Season 1 used David Cho's raw, primal paintings for its title cards, Season 2 goes for a much more clever, detailed approach. It actively borrows classic Western masterpieces to visualize smash the characters' raw, ugly desires against the fake elegance of high society. On top of that, they layered in the wild topography style of Reagan, the legendary 90s American alternative music magazine. Led by the iconic designer David Carson, the magazine was famous for its chaotic, twisted layouts that totally threw readability out the window. The production team borrowed this aesthetic to perfectly represent the characters' distorted, trapped egos. The first episode, All the Things We Are Never Going to Have, takes its title from an insight by relationship expert Esther Perel. Quentin Magis, the moneylender, and his wife appears on the title card. Through the husband counting money and the wife watching him, it perfectly hints at the endless thirst for wealth that constantly squirms beneath the surface of their relationships. Episode 2, A New Starting Point for Further Desires, which borrows a sentence from Marcel Proust, goes hand in hand with Jan Steen's The Dissolute Household. It uses a chaotic household scene to capture human greed, the kind that never stops, even after you hit a major milestone like Ashley's promotion. Episode 3, The Increasing Flimsiness of Any Certainties About the Future, uses a phrase by Lynn Seeger as its title. Hans Bolden Green's The Three Ages of Man and Death fills the screen. Set against the looming threat of their medical malpractice being exposed and their deep marital paranoia, it places their fragile life plans right in front of the absolute reality of death. Episode 4, Oh the Comfort, The Inexpressive Comfort, quoting Dinah Malek Craig, features Yospan Crossbakes, The Temptation of Saint Anthony, as its title card. It sharply highlights their hypocritical piece, pretending to be comfortable caregivers on the other side, while suppressed rage and temptation boil underneath. Episode 5, I'm Killing My Flesh Without It, taking its title from Sylvia Plath's diary, meets Nikolai Abigos, The Nightmare. It visualizes the soul-crushing despair following the pet dog's death, turning the total collapse of the ego into a little monster sitting on someone's chest. Episode 6, Those Blue Remembered Hills, is taken from a line of poem by A.E. Housman. Set against the Peterburg's landscape with the fall of Icarus, it drives into Josh's mind as he desperately chases his lost youth and wasted past through a neon-soaked hallucination. Episode 7, The Hour of Separation, quoting Khalil Gibran, combines with Nikolai Smythe's The Eavesdropper. It captures that painful moment of truth where held captive in soul, they are forced to finally look at the ugly, hidden sides of each other. The final episode, It Will Stay This Way and You Will Obey, is a sentence by Marian Woodman. Joseph Archibald's fourth season appears, signaling a tragic fate that repeats like the seasons, completely ignoring personal will. It's a sad reminder that we are all ultimately forced to bow to the giant will of capitalism. The original score by Oscar winner Phineas O'Connor prompts a constant, nervous tension through the entire show. The pop needle drops act as perfect cultural markers, splitting the identities of millennials and Gen Z. By blasting late 2000s electropop and indie sleaze anthems like M83's Midnight City and Daft Punk's Get Lucky, the show cranks up Josh and Lindsay's millennial anxiety, nostalgia, and grief for their lost youth. Meanwhile, tracks by Billie Eilish and Chappell Roan perfectly capture the depression, existential dread, and chaotic emptiness inside Austin and Ashley, the ultimate Gen Z representative. The epic sound of Phoenix, followed by Justin Timberlake's What Goes Around Comes Around, playing at the end, brilliantly nails the core theme of karma, literally just through the song titles alone. In the finale of Beef Season 2, director Lee Sung Jin brilliantly weaves karma and reincarnation, the core of Buddhist and Hindu philosophy, into the visuals and the story. It moves way beyond just being a black comedy or crime thriller. It becomes a heavy, philosophical look at the endless cycle of pain that we can never truly escape. The scene that hits hardest with the cruelty of karma is Austin's taxi sequence. After surviving a life-or-death escape from the Turcos clinic in Seoul, Austin jumps into a cab, clutching a USB drive, the golden ticket to expose Cheoman Park. High on freedom and victory, Austin calls Eunice to confess his love. But in the heavy, awkward silence on the other end of the line, it suddenly hits him. He realizes that this new life he thought he won is really just another loop of leeching off the capitalism system and someone else's desires. True acting isn't just about the actor. It lives in the blank space between the setup and the outcome. In that split second, his ecstatic, crazy smile horribly melts away into cold disillusionment and total defeat. Instead of being the hero or running away with the Eunice, Austin cuts a dirty deal with the Chairwoman Park to secure Ashley the manager position at the club. At the end of the day, Austin's choice is a total surrender to the system. He knows that escaping with the Eunice would just be trading one master for another, so he chooses to crawl back to the fake life he's used to. Playing house, having a kid, and settling down with Ashley is all just a comfortable, gilded cage he bought by selling his soul to Chairwoman Park. It's a cowardly survivor tactic. Too exhausted to keep fighting, he just puts his hypocritical mask right back on. Failing to break the cycle of rage, Austin willingly steps right back onto the hamster wheel of karma, living as cog in the machine under the illusion of peace. He tells the cab driver to cancel the trip, choosing to drive straight back into his familiar safe hell with the woman who betrayed him. Watching that smile slowly die is hands down one of the best moments of season 2. It's a brutal reminder of how pointless human free will can sometimes be. The 8-year time jump in the epilogue brings the show full circle in the most ruthless, symmetrical way possible. Ashley, who started out desperate for health insurance and exploited by Josh and Lindsay, is now the general manager of Monte Vista Point. She gives a painfully fake welcome speech that perfectly mirrors Josh's speech from the very first episode. Right beside her is Austin, looking completely checked out while holding their IVF baby. On paper, it's the perfect settle down life they always wanted. But in reality, it's just a horrifying rerun. You look into their hollow dead eyes and you can see they are inherited all the crushing exhaustion, isolation, and misery that Josh and Lindsay had. They didn't break the will or win any kind of freedom. They just inherited the older generation's miserable fake lifestyle wholesale. It's a tragic passing of the torch. They have fully morphed into the exact monsters they used to hate, essentially becoming Josh 2.0. Josh, who willingly took the fall for the embezzlement and murder charges, ironically finds true peace and enlightenment in prison by finally letting go of his worldly desires. After the weirdly serene scene of him handing out fruit snacks to inmates, the camera pulls back to show us everyone: the trapped, the free, the winners, and the losers. The camera pans over the grave of Chairman Park's ex-husband and pulls way up into the sky. We see the characters' scattered home and lives perfectly arranged into a massive concentric mandala. And that giant circle is tightly gripped in the terrifying claws of a mythical beast that rules over life and death. It's a chillingly beautiful, grand philosophical ending. It tells us that all our messy affairs, greed, and desperate hustling for cash are just the pathetic struggles of tiny bugs spinning endlessly inside the universe's giant wheel of karma. The second season of VIP asks some seriously heavy, fatal questions about human existence and capitalism. By pushing the conflict to an absolute extreme, this show has hit the absolute peak of modern TV art. It sharply dissects the bloody war between millennials and Gen Z in a world hoarded by boomers. And it paints this broken materialistic system perfectly over a canvas where Western capitalism violently crashes into Eastern philosophy. The toxic chain of deception and disconnection never breaks. Even after all the revenge and exposure, it just gets handed down to the next generation 8 years later, showing us just how absurd the structure of life really is. Season 2 is so cold that it treats even the toxic connection of season 1 like a luxury. It beautifully and grotesquely shows the tragic fate of modern humans forced to run the capitalist hamster wheel of greed and ruin, totally disconnected from everyone else. It feels like we finally entered an era where a Korean creator can stand tall and speak to the world in Korean, pushing a Korean perspective and philosophy through a massive American production, without having to filter it through a distorted Western lens. And honestly, I'm still just amazed that the whole world is actually leaning in and listening so closely. Beef Season 2 is the most elegant, visually stunning takedown of late-stage capitalism that television has ever pulled off. If there were a Nobel Prize in Literature for TV writing, Lee Sung Jin would hands down be the one to win it. Well, that's all for today on Hana's Island. If you like my video, please support me by hitting like and subscribe. And I will see you right back here next time. Until then, rest peacefully on an island that perfectly fits your own latitude. Take care. Bye.